Joining us to talk about this is Andy Norman. He's the director of the Humanism Institute at Carnegie Mellon University. He studies how ideologies short-circuit minds and corrupt moral identity. His latest book is called Mental Immunity: Infectious Ideas, Mind Parasites, and the Search for a Better Way to Think. Andy, thanks for joining us. First of all, what exactly is mental immunity?
Thank you, David. It's a pleasure to be here. So mental immunity is the mind's resistance to the uptake of bad ideas. Now, it happens that each of us is more or less susceptible to sketchy ideas of different types. And the more susceptible we are, the less immune we are. So susceptibility and immunity are kind of inverse notions.
So we're all susceptible, and what depends, what changes that? What are the sort of things that could make us more susceptible or less susceptible to wacky stuff?
Right. So traditional way of thinking about this is that by teaching critical thinking, we become less susceptible to wacky ideas. And there's certainly some truth to that. The problem is that the concept of critical thinking is a very blunt instrument, and it doesn't give us much insight into how to do it properly. But it turns out that the concepts borrowed from the science of immunology shed astonishing light on ways in which we can basically inoculate our own minds and each other's minds against the worst forms of cognitive contagion.
And what are some of those concepts from immunology?
Right. So the idea of a mental immune system is one, but there are ideas out there that actually disrupt mental immune function. There are other ideas out there that enhance or boost mental immune function. There are mental immune disorders of the mind, whereby people lose the ability to distinguish between right and wrong or truth and falsehood. And by using concepts like these to understand the phenomenon of, say, conspiracy thinking, we actually gain a great deal of insight into how we can educate people so as to be less prone to these deformations of thought.
Now, I'm glad you mentioned conspiracy theories, because one of the big picture items that I wanted to look at with all this is it does feel, at least because of the rise of nationalism and some would argue the fascism tendencies of Donald Trump, that there has been more of this sort of idea of embracing things that are defined by basic science and basic facts. Is that accurate to say that there's a connection or a correlation between a rise in people who don't have this sort of immunity and what's happening at a national political level?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a phenomenon from a concept from psychology called identity protective cognition. And the idea is that if you hitch your identity to a set of controversial ideas, then you become highly resistant to any questions or challenges to those ideas. And in fact, the proper way to understand this is to see this identity formation as actually hot wiring your mind's immune system so as to make it so you can't even dialogue in a fair-minded way about the ideas that have become central to your identity. So the way we avoid that is to teach people when young, don't identify with your beliefs, because if you do, you're compromising your own immunity to bad ideas.
There have been studies through the years that suggest specific personalities or personal types that are more likely to be conservative, more likely to be liberal. Have you found that those personal types are also categorized as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think any one of us can become insecure enough to cling to ideas. So when you don't have a lot else going for you, or you've gone through tough times, it's easy to latch on to ideas that you think help to secure you as a stable, virtuous person. So I think we're all prone to this, and I've gone through periods of my own life where my own thinking became kind of sketchy because I was in a really difficult, say, professional situation. So one way to improve our resistance to bad ideas is to help people find stable niches in the world where they can feel secure.
So let's take this to the economic disruption that we've seen for the last several years. And I think there's a study out of Oxford that something like half of all jobs that exist are going to be gone in 20 years because of automation. So you have industries that are changing very quickly. You have entire communities that are being hollowed out, people having to learn new ways of work. there's this incredible economic disruption anyway, never mind the economic disruption that comes from the pandemic. And it feels like then when somebody comes along, whether it's a Donald Trump or somebody else, and says, hey, I've got the solution. The solution is let's stop those immigrants from crossing the border and taking your jobs. That's appealing to a certain number of people.
Absolutely. I think there's tons of evidence now in supporting that idea. I don't know quite what to think of this apocalyptic idea that the robots are going to take all our jobs, but I definitely think it's cause for concern, and we need to start preparing a future that prevents some kind of catastrophic social dislocation.
Or whether it's in a society that's changing because of automation, or whether just people lose their jobs and they're dealing with economic anxiety. You mentioned there are periods in our life when we're more susceptible to this. Could that also be, say, a period in life where if you're politically active and you've been working for particular causes for a long time, and then you say, well, wait a second, you see, Washington's broken. I can't get anything done. The system is messed up. Can that be a period in your life where suddenly somebody comes along and says, you know what, we're going to drain the swamp, we're going to break the system, and we're going to destroy all these institutions? I would imagine that could feel very satisfying to some people.
Well, absolutely, and very seductive, right? I mean, look, we've tolerated a kind of low-level corruption in our society for a very long time. I mean, our political leaders have bought into the idea that you have to raise money to run a political campaign, and that's a distorting influence that we've simply grown too comfortable with, and we shouldn't be surprised that that we're witnessing a huge backlash right now. The idea that the swamp is irredeemable and that we have to rise up against our oppressors becomes enormously seductive when politicians haven't been listening to the less well-heeled among the American citizenry.
We've been talking a lot at the macro level, what's been going on with Donald Trump and nationalism, but on a more sort of micro level and how we sort of started the conversation, all of us know people, neighbors, friends, maybe even relatives who seem to embrace these ideas that defy logic. Are there things that we can say to them in one-on-one conversations or smaller settings that can help them start to see basic science and basic facts without insulting them?
Yeah, wonderful question. The short answer is that it's much easier to prevent a mind infection than it is to cure one. So the science seems to indicate that prevention, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cult deprogramming, so to speak. However, that doesn't mean that your cranky uncle who's always worried about the government coming to seize his guns, that there's no way to reach him. The black blues musician Daryl Davis has actually met regularly with Klansmen and deconverted them by first and foremost, listening to them. And respectful listening and judicious use of clarifying questions can be a very powerful tool in helping to deprogram somebody who's been sucked down a rabbit hole.
So, for example, if I've got somebody on my street who, say, doesn't believe in vaccines, who thinks that they cause all sorts of problems, rather than just being judgmental and saying, no, wait a second, you're crazy, well, tell me a little bit more about where does this sort of come from? What are your fears? What is it that bothers you?
Beautiful. I think I'm tempted to call the method to deprogram the cranky uncles the tell me more method. And so I think you're channeling exactly the right idea there. Get them to open up. Help them feel safe exploring their ideas. And a lot of times they'll start to see the weaknesses in their ideas themselves, but you got to give it time and it takes patience.
Now, are there certain types of people or you mentioned that when somebody's already sort of believing in a conspiracy theory or a cult, and let's say, Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene and whatever beliefs that she and others may have had about QAnon, are there some people that are too far gone that it's not worth the time and the energy invested to try to help them?
Yeah, probably. I hate to write off anyone, but yeah, I'm not going to waste my time trying to deprogram Marjorie Taylor Greene, and I think I can put my effort to better use trying to save people from the kind of demagoguery that she's peddling.
And as far as our own approach towards the world, what are some of the things that all of us in our daily life, whether when we're watching the news or reading the newspapers online, whatever we're doing, or having conversations with people, what are the sort of things that we should be remembering and the conversations we should be having with ourselves to protect ourselves on this?
Beautiful question. So it turns out that doubts are the mind's antibodies. So if you learn to listen, even to the little quiet doubts in the back of your mind, a lot of times they're trying to call attention to a problematic feature of an idea or a course of action that you're considering. Learn to pay attention to your doubts, and your mind's immune system will get stronger. And express your doubts to others in non-threatening ways so that they can hear them and their immune systems will get strong, mental immune systems will get strong.
It's so interesting because I've got a very good friend down in Washington, D.C. who has said, you know what, you should spend a little time in that room where you're where you have that depression, visit that depression, try to sort of embrace it and understand it. And it seems counterintuitive, but in the long haul, it seems like, well, if you spend time sort of trying to figure it out and sort of being at peace with the fact that, sure, all of us get depressed, it becomes easier to find out what the motivator is.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
Okay. Andy Norman, he is the director of the Humanism Initiative at Carnegie Mellon University. The latest book he has is Mental Immunity, Infectious Ideas, Mind Parasites, and the Search for a Better Way to Think. Andy, thanks so much for joining us today. I appreciate it.
My pleasure, David.
And thanks to all of you for watching the conversation. On behalf of Asher Cofield, I'm David Shuster. Thanks again, everybody.
Thanks for watching the Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.